The arena was deathly quiet, the kind of silence that rings in the ears louder than a roar. Morning sun filtered through the rafters, casting golden stripes over the dust-churned floor. Rows of wooden benches sat half-filled with spectators who whispered into cupped hands, their murmurs chasing one another like nervous birds. In the center, a metal gate creaked open with a reluctant groan. A wheelchair rolled in. It was pushed by a woman with hard-set shoulders and soft eyes, Camille, in her 40s, a former rodeo rider who had traded reins for responsibilities after her daughter's accident. In the chair sat 16-year-old Lila, her hands resting motionless on the wheels, her legs thin beneath worn jeans, lifeless. Her eyes, though, were sharp. Not angry, not afraid, just watchful. The announcer didn't speak. No one did. All eyes followed the girl as she was wheeled into the arena, as if every person there understood something unspoken was about to unfold. Camille whispered, "Are you sure about this?" Lila didn't blink. "Open the gate." Camille hesitated, her hand hovering above the radio clipped to her belt. Then she nodded, turned, and gave the signal. From the far end of the arena, another gate clanged. Dust exploded as a horse thundered out, black, massive, wild. The stallion didn't trot. He stormed in like a wave breaking free of a dam. Muscles bunched beneath a glistening coat, his mane flying like battle flags. He skidded to a halt, nostrils flaring, eyes burning with something ancient and untamable. His name was Phantom. No one had ridden him. No one had even touched him. Acquired from a failed Mustang training program, he had kicked 2 trainers, bit another, and nearly escaped transport by leaping over a 6-foot corral. He was beautiful, but his beauty was the kind that warned rather than invited. And now he stood just 30 feet from a paralyzed girl in a wheelchair. Camille tensed behind her, one hand on the chair's handle, ready to yank her daughter back at the first sign of danger. But Lila raised her hand slightly, a gentle stay. Camille froze. The stallion pawed the ground. Dust swirled. The girl didn't move. The stallion snorted, shook his massive head, and took a step closer. Lila's lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, she simply breathed in, long and steady, and let it out through her nose, mimicking the animal's rhythm. The crowd held its breath. Another step. The tension wrapped around the arena like wire. One whisper echoed through the stands. "She's going to get killed." But Lila didn't flinch. A week ago, this would have been unthinkable. A week ago, Lila hadn't left the house in months. Since the crash, she'd been a ghost in her own skin, drifting from room to room in a body that no longer obeyed her, ignoring visitors, even the ones who tried hardest to understand. Even Camille had started knocking on her daughter's door like she was asking permission to remember who she used to be. But then Camille showed her the flyer. It was meant to be a joke. Therapeutic horse encounters for youth with disabilities. A county fair stunt, really. Most of the kids would pet a Shetland and maybe ride a pony led on a rope. Camille figured it was a reason to get Lila out of the house, into sunlight. Lila hadn't said anything at first, but that night, she stared at the flyer so long that Camille could see the ink imprint on the back of her fingers from where she clutched it. The next morning, she said just 4 words. "I want the stallion." Camille laughed at first. "You mean the pony, right?" Lila met her eyes, the first time in weeks. "No, the black one." At the event, volunteers tried to guide her to gentler horses, but she rolled past them all. When she reached Phantom's pen, he bucked, crashed into the fencing, and let out a scream that sent a volunteer tripping backward. And Lila, she had smiled. Now here they were, one step away from something no one could name yet. Phantom lowered his head slightly, ears twitching, eyes locked on the girl. Another step. He was within arm's reach now, muscles coiled like springs. Lila raised her hand slowly, palm open. He snorted. The breath warmed her fingertips. She didn't move. The stallion blinked, then lifted his head. He circled her once, tail flicking, hooves whispering against the ground. The wheelchair creaked as Lila turned slightly to follow his movement with her eyes. He stopped behind her. The audience leaned forward as one. Then slowly, deliberately, Phantom lowered his massive head and nuzzled the back of her shoulder. Gasps echoed like popping corks across the arena. Someone stood up in disbelief. Camille's hand flew to her mouth. Lila closed her eyes, her throat tight, heart pounding. She didn't need to look at the crowd. She didn't need to see their faces. This wasn't for them. It was for her, for the part of her that had screamed in the silence of her room every night, reliving the crash, for the legs that would never dance, never climb trees, never run, for the girl who had once ridden barrels and galloped through morning fields and now stared out windows like a prisoner, and for the beast who looked like rage made flesh, but had chosen not to bite. The gate clanged again. The spell broke. Camille stepped forward, her voice hoarse. "Lila, let's go." Lila reached out and brushed Phantom's muzzle. He didn't pull away. For a second longer, they simply breathed together. Then she let her hand fall, and Camille wheeled her back, the crowd parting in stunned silence. As they reached the tunnel leading out of the arena, Lila spoke without turning. "He's not broken," she said. "Just like me." Camille choked back a response, because she knew now this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. It was only the beginning. The old barn creaked with the weight of years, with groaning in protest each time the wind pushed against its ribs. Light filtered in through the high windows, catching in the floating hay dust, casting the scene in a golden, almost reverent hue. Camille stood at the edge of the stall, arms crossed, watching her daughter from a distance. Lila sat in her chair, silent, still as a stone, but her eyes never left Phantom. The stallion stood just inside the open gate, untethered, free to bolt at any moment. Yet he didn't. He stayed, his eyes locked with hers, as if the girl in the chair held a secret even he had yet to understand. It had been 5 days since the arena. 5 days since Phantom had chosen not to lash out, not to flee, but to lean into the presence of a girl who couldn't run, couldn't chase, couldn't force. Something had shifted, not just in the stallion, but in Lila. She came back to the barn every morning now, earlier than the staff, rolling herself down the gravel path, with steady arms. Camille had tried to follow her once, quietly, hoping to watch without being seen. But when Lila caught her shadow on the wall, she didn't turn or smile. She just said, "Let me have this." So Camille did. Now, watching from the aisle, Camille marveled. Phantom hadn't allowed anyone to brush him in weeks, but today, Lila held a soft curry comb in her lap. She waited, arm outstretched. The horse stared at the tool, then at her hand. Slowly, hesitantly, he stepped forward. His muzzle touched her fingers, then lowered to the brush. With a twitch of his flank, he turned and stood sideways, presenting his shoulder. Lila laughed, not loud but full. Camille hadn't heard that sound since before the accident. Not even when friends came to visit. Not even when doctors offered small victories, nerve responses, physical therapy. The laughter now wasn't about recovery. It was about connection. "You're not so scary," Lila whispered, running the brush along Phantom's shoulder in slow, rhythmic circles. "You just want someone to stop expecting things from you." Phantom flicked his ear, swished his tail. Lila's arms were strong now. Maneuvering a wheelchair every day had turned her muscles into cables of quiet resilience. But brushing the horse, this required something different. A gentleness that came not from weakness, but choice. From the loft above, a man cleared his throat. Lila looked up. "Didn't mean to interrupt," said a gravelly voice. A figure descended the ladder slowly, boots hitting each rung with patient weight. He wore a dusty hat and a coat that looked as though it had seen every season twice. His beard was trimmed but wild at the edges. His name was Wade. He was the barn's caretaker, not the official trainer. He didn't believe in titles, but he knew horses like he knew the weather, through instinct, not instruction. Wade didn't speak much, especially not to kids, and he sure didn't explain himself to parents. But something in the girl's presence had made him curious. "You come early," he said, his eyes drifting between her and the stallion. Lila looked down at her lap. "He doesn't like crowds." Wade nodded. "Neither do I." They stood in silence. Phantom gave a quiet grunt and pushed his head under Lila's arm like a dog seeking shade. She chuckled and shifted slightly, careful not to drop the brush. Wade leaned against the wall. "You ever rode bareback?" Lila blinked. Before the crash, yeah. I used to jump too. You fall. Not from a horse. From a truck. Drunk driver hit us. She didn't look away as she said it. She had told the story enough times now that it no longer felt like it belonged to her. But Wade's eyes didn't flicker with pity. Just a steady, quiet attention. I saw what he did in the arena, Wade said. That wasn't nothing. That horse has been locked up in his own rage since the roundup. Never seen him look at someone like that. Lila stroked Phantom's cheek. Maybe he doesn't want to be fixed. Maybe he just wants someone to not be afraid of him. Wade nodded slowly. What if I told you he'd never let a rider on his back, but he's letting you near every day? That's not normal. I'm not trying to ride him. Maybe you should. Lila turned sharply, her expression flickering with something between disbelief and hope. I can't even stand. You don't need legs to balance. Not if you've got trust. She looked at Phantom. He was chewing softly, eyes half-lidded, calm, present, the very image of trust. Her fingers went still on his neck. Wade pushed off the wall. I'll be here tomorrow morning. We'll try something. Not riding. Just sitting. One step at a time. Lila didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. The next morning came like a whispered dare. Camille drove her daughter as usual, but didn't go inside. She waited in the truck, heart thudding against the steering wheel, eyes on the barn door like it might open to reveal something changed, something broken. Inside, Wade had prepared everything. Phantom stood inside a small, round pen. No halter, no saddle, just a thick wool pad laid across his back. Lila sat at the edge of the platform they'd built, the top just high enough to slide from the wheelchair without a fall. You sure he's ready for this? She asked. Wade was checking the floor, making sure there were no nails, no splinters. He's waiting for you. The stallion stood like a statue, unmoving, but his eyes never left her. With a deep breath, Lila grabbed the rail. She pulled, her arms trembling with effort. Wade moved to help, but she shook her head. Inch by inch, she shifted herself until she was perched on the platform edge. Her legs dangled, useless. Her breath came short and fast. Wade stepped aside. Take your time. She reached out. Phantom stepped forward, slow and sure. He didn't flinch as she grasped the wool pad, didn't twitch as she slid her weight against his side. When she finally settled across his back, her arms wrapped around his neck, not tightly, just enough to hold on. Phantom took a single step, then stopped. Lila's eyes widened. She wasn't falling. She was riding. Not moving yet, but riding. And for the first time in a long time, she felt taller than the world. Wade stood at the gate of the round pen, arms folded, watching the two figures move as one. Lila balanced on Phantom's back with a poise that no one had taught her, no one had expected. Her spine straight, hands gently resting on the horse's mane, her eyes fixed not on the ground, not on the risk, but straight ahead. Phantom walked in a slow circle, careful, deliberate, as if conscious that something sacred was taking place. Camille, who had finally come inside, stood behind the rail in stunned silence. She had spent months grieving the daughter who once galloped down hills, wild and fearless. But now, she saw something more powerful than return. She saw transformation. Not a miracle, not recovery in the physical sense, but a triumph of will, of trust, of a bond formed in the quiet space where pain and defiance met. I didn't teach her that, Camille murmured, barely loud enough for Wade to hear. She taught herself, Wade said, and that horse did the rest. Phantom stopped without command and lowered his head slightly, signaling readiness. Wade stepped forward, and with a steadying hand, Lila slid down into the wheelchair Wade had rolled into place. Her arms shook from the strain, and sweat dotted her brow, but she was smiling. Not the hesitant smile of someone seeking approval, but the bright, unstoppable grin of someone who had done the impossible. Camille rushed to her side. Are you okay? Lila nodded. I didn't fall. You didn't even wobble. Wade added. You got balance most riders would envy. Phantom turned, nostrils flaring slightly, then stepped to Lila's side. He nudged her shoulder with his nose. She reached up and stroked his jaw, her touch slow and deliberate, like she was memorizing the feel of him. The bond between them had deepened into something wordless. She no longer had to coax him. He sought her out. Lila had become more than a presence in his world. She was an anchor, a quiet constant that reminded him he was no longer alone. By the next week, their sessions grew longer. Wade taught her how to steer with her weight, how to guide Phantom with soft noises and the occasional tug of mane. There was no saddle, no bridle, no reins, only trust. No one else dared ride Phantom. Wade hadn't even attempted it. But Lila, she rode him like she belonged there. Word began to spread. Other riders at the stable would pause to watch. Even the barn owner came by one morning, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's the horse we nearly gave up on." Camille, who now brought coffee for Wade and sat on the top rail each morning, nodded. "That's the girl they nearly gave up on, too." Then one evening, the news arrived that changed everything. Wade found Camille near the tack room, her hands busy with grooming supplies, though her thoughts were clearly elsewhere. "There's a show coming up," he said without preamble. "A Liberty exhibition in the county fair. Not competition, just a showcase. Phantom and Lila could be part of it." Camille hesitated. A performance? In front of people? No judges, no scorecards. Just a chance to show what they've built. She hates crowds. Phantom does too. But maybe together, they can handle it. Camille said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You'd have to ask her." He already had. Lila said yes. The weeks that followed were filled with practice, not to perfect a routine, but to prepare for noise, distractions, and an audience. They moved to the larger arena, where Lila and Phantom practiced weaving through cones, walking in time to music, and finally, standing still side by side in silence, a moment they would end the show with, to let the crowd understand it was not tricks they had come to witness, but trust. The night before the fair, Camille found Lila staring out her bedroom window, eyes distant. "Nervous?" she asked. Lila shrugged. "A little. You don't have to do this." "I know," Lila said, "but I want to." Camille sat on the edge of the bed. "Whatever happens out there, you've already done more than I ever thought possible." "I'm not doing it to prove something," Lila said. "Not to anyone. Not even to him." "Then why?" Lila smiled faintly. "Because it feels like flying." The day of the fair arrived with cool air and skies that hinted at rain, but never followed through. The exhibition ring was simple. No grand banners, just a packed crowd and a quiet announcer. Lila sat behind the holding fence, brushing Phantom's neck one last time. Wade waited by the gate, watching like a hawk but saying nothing. When their turn came, the arena fell silent. Lila entered first, rolling in slowly, Phantom walking beside her. No rope, no halter, just two beings side by side. As they reached the center, Lila locked the chair and reached for the wooden ramp that had been set up earlier. The audience leaned forward. She pulled herself up. Phantom waited. Then, with a breath, she shifted her weight onto his back. Gasps rippled across the bleachers. And then movement. Phantom walked forward, slow and calm, circling the arena. Lila's posture was proud, her expression serene. Together, they passed the audience without a flinch. When the music started, a soft piano melody, Lila leaned gently, and Phantom responded, weaving through the cones, pivoting in graceful arcs, stopping on cue with no more than a breath from her lips. When the song faded, Lila laid forward and wrapped her arms around Phantom's neck. The stallion stopped, lowered his head, and stood utterly still. The arena held its breath. Then the crowd erupted. Applause thundered. Some stood. Others wept. Lila dismounted slowly, returning to her chair with Wade's quiet help. She rolled to the gate, Phantom by her side. Camille met her with tears streaming down her face. "You were free," Lila said, finishing the sentence for her. Phantom let out a soft snort, as if in agreement. That night, long after the crowd had left, Camille sat beside her daughter in the barn. Phantom lay in the straw, eyes half closed. Lila leaned her head against his shoulder, her fingers woven through his coarse mane. "I don't know what happens next," Camille said. "Neither do I," Lila whispered, "but I think we'll figure it out." Outside, Thunder rumbled in the distance, soft and far away. But inside, everything was calm. The wind carried a faint bite. That morning, as Wade stood at the edge of the pasture, eyes narrowed against the glare of the low sun. Autumn had begun to trace its fingers across the landscape, leaves turning amber, the smell of earth thicker in the air. Phantom stood farther out, still and vigilant, as if sensing the shift before it arrived. Lila wheeled herself up the gravel path, wrapped in a fleece blanket, her hands bare despite the cold. Wade turned as she approached, his usual nod softening into a smile. "Didn't think you'd be out this early." "I couldn't sleep," she said, voice raspy. Felt like he was waiting. They stood in silence, watching Phantom. The stallion hadn't been the same since the fair. He wasn't worse, just quieter, more inward, as though the performance had closed a chapter for him too. And now he lingered between something finished and something unknown. "I've been thinking," Lila said. "Dangerous," Wade teased. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "What happens if he needs more than I can give?" Wade glanced at her. "He doesn't need more. He needs you. But I'm still in this chair. I can't trade him like you can. I can't even walk beside him for long stretches. What if I'm holding him back?" "He doesn't look held back to me," Wade said, gesturing toward the pasture. Phantom was trotting now, stretching into a graceful canter. The power in his stride was undeniable, but so was the way he angled his body toward them, circling in wide arcs that never quite took him far away. "I want to do more," Lila whispered, "but I'm scared I won't be enough." Wade crouched beside her. "You gave him something no one else could. You saw him when he was untouchable. You sat still long enough for him to come to you. That's not holding him back. That's leading with stillness. Some horses need space. Some need fire. Phantom needed quiet. You were the only one who offered it." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the years on his face. The quiet wisdom earned not from books or lectures, but from countless hours in barns, in pastures, in waiting for horses to speak. Lila nodded once. "Then I want to go further. With him." Camille, listening from a distance, stepped forward. "What do you mean?" "I want to learn Liberty work. Not just tricks, real communication, movement, dance. I've seen what Phantom can do when he's free. I want to meet him there." Camille hesitated, but she'd stopped saying no weeks ago. Too much had changed. Too much had been proven. Wade straightened, brushing dirt from his knees. "Then let's begin." The next weeks were harder than any before. Not because of the horse. Phantom met Lila with every ounce of his attention, but because Liberty required a depth of presence that few could maintain. There were no ropes, no aids, no saddle to anchor her. Only trust. Only breath and movement and silence. They started in the round pen, where Phantom had first rejected human touch. Now he mirrored Lila's gestures from a distance, responding to subtle cues, a raised hand, a shift of her head, the cadence of her breath. She practiced for hours, even when her muscles ached and her arms trembled from fatigue. Wade adjusted their training for her limitations, but never lowered the expectations. Phantom didn't need pity. He needed precision. And Lila delivered. Camille became a constant presence. She stopped hovering and started learning about body language, about timing, about what it meant to listen without speaking. The three of them formed an unspoken triangle of support, each watching for signs the others might miss. Then one day, the call came. A national equine therapy organization had seen footage from the county fair. They were holding a gathering, a weekend demonstration of breakthroughs in equine connection and rehabilitation. And they wanted Lila and Phantom to headline. Lila was stunned. "Why us?" Wade only said, "Why not?" The event would be in 2 months, in a small arena near the state border. It wasn't about showmanship. It was about testimony. Lila would speak, then perform a brief Liberty routine with Phantom. No one expected perfection, only honesty. Camille was terrified. What if he bolts? What if you fall? "I'll get back up," Lila replied. "He always does." Preparation became ritual. Mornings were for groundwork, afternoons for rest and review, evenings for reflection. Wade, ever silent in the background, now took video for Lila to analyze her movements. Camille managed scheduling, food, even media inquiries. What had begun as healing had become purpose. The night before they left for the event, Lila sat in the barn beside Phantom, fingers trailing along his flank. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think I was broken, that the accident ended who I was." Phantom turned his head toward her. "But maybe it ended who I wasn't supposed to be." The stallion blinked, slow and deliberate, before lowering his head until his forehead touched hers. The drive was long, but quiet. Camille hummed old lullabies under her breath. Wade stared out the window, lost in memory. And Lila, hands folded in her lap, imagined the feel of the arena beneath Phantom's hooves. She didn't dream of applause, only of presence. At the venue, they were welcomed with kindness and reverence. Lila was introduced last on the final day, the spot reserved for something unforgettable. She wheeled herself into the center of the ring, microphone in hand. Phantom waited behind the gate. "I'm not a trainer," she began. "Not a rider, not a champion. I'm just a girl who sat still long enough for a broken horse to trust her." Silence settled like snow. "He didn't save me," she continued. "I didn't save him. We met in the middle, and we stayed." She set the mic aside. Wade opened the gate. Phantom trotted in, alert but calm. Lila raised her hand. He came to her. Then, to music chosen by Camille, something soft and swelling, they moved. A slow arc. A pivot. A bow. Phantom circled her, then stopped at her side. She raised her arms, and he reared, not high, not dramatic, but enough to echo triumph. When he landed, she whispered one word. "Home." And he followed her out. Not driven, not pulled, just followed. The crowd stood. No one clapped. Not yet. Some moments were too full for noise. Backstage, Camille embraced her daughter, whispering through tears. "You didn't just change him, Lila. You changed all of us." Wade placed a hand on Phantom's shoulder. This was never about riding. It was always about trust. Lila looked at the people, then at the horse, then at her own hands. "I think," she said, "this is only the beginning."